In the men's 100-meter semi-finals, there's Noah Lyles, and he's going to do it again. He has always been a fan of Japanese anime.
This is Noah Lyles. He's a 26-year-old Olympian representing the United States at the 2024 Olympic Games held in Paris. On the world stage, he seizes the opportunity to show off his personality. What does he do? He flashes a Yu-Gi-Oh card, Exodia to be specific, presumably signaling that the victory was already his. And it was. Lyles went on to win the gold medal in the 100-meter dash as well as the bronze in the 200-meter. But how do we get here? At this point, anime culture has breached the mainstream to the point where it's not even surprising whenever an athlete casually drops a Dragon Ball reference. And to answer that question, I journey to find and document every single anime sports celebration ever. Yes, every single one. It wasn't exactly a painless process, but through my research, I was able to chart not only the growth of anime culture through sports, but the global consciousness as a whole. So what I did is I created a spreadsheet of every single anime sports celebration I could find on the internet. Some of them were ones I remembered, some I found through hype edits, and others were through meticulous searches of social media, sports stats sites, and Google Images. But before I get into the meat of the video, I just quickly want to go over the rules and the criteria of my search. My criteria was that the anime celebration had to be during a game, for the most part. I did make some exceptions for things like ring entrances, but I left off things like athletes referencing anime in interviews, or else my search would have just never ended. First, I found the clip, then I had to identify the athlete who made the celebration, then I had to find the actual sporting event that this moment was from in order to date it, and this was a lot easier said than done. I was able to date a majority of these celebrations, but the few where I couldn't track down a specific game, I just used the date of the earliest known post on social media or news websites about that specific moment. I then documented what the actual celebration was, the character was referencing, and what series that character belonged to. I also tried to document the outcome of that sporting event, whether the athlete in question won or lost, or in the case of the Olympics, whether they placed in the top 3 of that event. Which, spoiler alert, over 95% of the athletes won the matches which they performed in anime celebration, which unfortunately says a lot less about having the power of anime and God on your side, as it does the fact that in sports, if you're celebrating, you're likely already winning or have already won. So with that preamble out of the way, let's look at the history of anime celebrations in sports. So this was the first sport that I tried to document, and I have to admit, Latin America broke me. I don't think it's revelatory to say that regions like Mexico, Spain, and South America really love anime. So trying to track down every single anime reference in a professional soccer game was just like battling this endless hydra. As soon as I would try to nail down a date of one celebration, it would be part of like a compilation that had 3 other celebrations I'd never seen before, which would then lead me down a rabbit hole of that player's celebrations, and it was just like endless. And as a result, the sport of soccer had far and away the most celebrations of any sport on my list. Nearly 60% of the celebrations on my list of over 100 entries came from the soccer pitch. And what was especially difficult about all this is I know f*** all about soccer. My main sport is football, yes, the actual football. And as many times as I've tried to get in on the hype of soccer that I see that it's so electric overseas, I just cannot get into it. And as a result, I really had no idea what players I was looking at, what teams they played for, how FIFA leagues are even structured, and this made researching moments based only on players' uniforms extremely difficult. Apart from being the largest pool of anime celebrations, soccer is also home to the very first anime celebration ever in the history of sports, at least according to me. It was this celebration by Marco Reyes and Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang. While there's not enough here to tell the date of the actual game this is from, I found this in a YouTube compilation of the two dated November 30th, 2015. While there's not a ton to go off of here, this is the fusion dance from Dragon Ball. Now it does seem like they're just warming up here, but it's inconclusive, and since it's the very first anime sports reference that I've seen in any sport, I feel like this qualifies it. Now, there are a lot of repeat soccer players on this list that I want to mention, but Marco Reyes deserves special mention as the founder of anime culture in soccer. Reyes is a German-born forward who currently plays for the LA Galaxy. I couldn't find any interviews of him talking about his love of Dragon Ball, but he does have 2 other anime celebrations with teammate Ashraf Hakimi performing the Kamehameha and another fusion dance in 2019, so it's safe to say he's a fan. He's also of special note because of his age. Marco is currently 35 years old, and the majority of the players we're about to see are young athletes ostensibly trying to show their personality and build their brand. Following Marco, there was one Dragon Ball celebration in 2016, and another in 2017 by Andre Pierre Gignac, and the combination of Irving Lozano and Brian Damian respectively. But in 2018, we see the start of a boom in anime representation. The majority of them come from one duo who have a very unique story, Josef Martinez and Miguel Almiron. Martinez and Almiron shared a close bond playing for Atlanta United, and they have this signature goal celebration. Now, what makes this fusion dance different than any of the others that have come before it or since is the bond that they share. Almiron calls Martinez one of his best friends in football, and that bond even extended after the two were separated. When Almiron left Atlanta United in 2019 to sign with Newcastle, Martinez paid tribute to his departed friend on his first goal of the season. Almiron returned the favor in 2020 after Martinez tore his ACL in his first game of the season. The two have insane Goten and Trunks energy, and it's worth a deep dive of its own from someone much more qualified to talk about the sport than I am. And even apart from the celebration itself, paying tribute to your fallen comrade is one of the most anime things you could do in any context, so that alone puts it to the top of our list in terms of notoriety. 2020 was also a very prolific year for sports and anime, and with the advent of COVID on the horizon, more people in the regular world were also adopting anime as a hobby. On March 11th, we had 2 different anime celebrations and 2 different games, which is pretty crazy, and one of those athletes is actually the second most prolific athlete in our entire search. Eduardo Salvio is a 34-year-old winger from Argentina and had a total of 8 celebrations in 2020 alone, all of which honored Dragon Ball. Salvio mixes it up too. This isn't just the standard Kamehameha. Salvio goes deep in his bag for a Maseko Wave, Solar Flare, Spirit Bomb, and a Big Bang Attack. Another honorable mention goes to Marcos Jr. He's a Brazilian soccer player who earned the nickname Krillin due to his short stature and bald head. He even has this Krillin tattoo. And what was one of the celebrations that he chose? Take a guess. And as we bleed more into the 2020s, we start to shift away from the almost exclusively Dragon Ball Cellies, and a new popular series begins to dominate the sports world, One Piece. Specifically, we have 3 Gear 2 Goal Cellies and 2 Shambles celebrations. And finally, before we wrap up our tour of the beautiful game, there's one more athlete that we haven't talked about yet who undoubtedly takes the modern sports anime crown, not just for his amount of anime celebrations, but his variety. Dominic Solanke is a 27-year-old striker from England who plays for Tottenham and is a member of the England national football team. And if you just search anime sports celebrations, you're going to see this dude's face everywhere. Attack on Titan, Demon Slayer, Chainsaw Man, Jujutsu Kaisen. These are obviously not obscure anime by any means, but in the sports world where the majority of anime celebrations are dominated by Dragon Ball and One Piece, Solanke keeps it interesting and has far and away the widest anime palette of any athlete in our search. At the time of this recording, Solanke holds the latest anime celebration in soccer, this tribute to Aki from Chainsaw Man. But seeing how voracious the anime fandom is in the soccer-loving demographic, I'm sure by the time you're watching this, there will already be a handful that will make this list outdated. But now let's switch gears to a completely different sport, football. Now, researching football anime celebrations was about 100 times easier than soccer. For one thing, it's my home sport, so I actually knew what I was looking at. And also, there were far, far less instances of anime references in the NFL. There were only about 18 compared to the 50 plus that I found in soccer, but it still made it the second most prolific sport. The first known anime celebration belongs to defensive tackle Mike Daniels. This is one that I specifically remembered whenever it happened because such a big deal was made that a professional athlete was referencing an anime in an NFL game. But despite this being a pretty big deal at the time, this was a really difficult celebration to track down footage for. Daniels is a vocal anime fan off the field, but this sack celebration was his one and only anime tribute on the field based on my research. And while Daniels may have been the first, the real torchbearer for anime culture in the NFL was this man. Juju Smith-Schuster is a wide receiver who currently plays for the Kansas City Chiefs. He started his career in Pittsburgh, and his authentic personality quickly made him a fan favorite. His first anime celebration was against the division rival Baltimore Ravens on October 1st, 2017, just weeks after Mike Daniels' Kamehameha sack. Juju returned the favor with his own blast, and his love of anime became public on social media and off-the-field interviews. Juju also has one other anime celebration that I really want to talk about, but I'm going to save that for later in the video. Juju also gets a major dub for the fact that this celebration apparently led to the inclusion of the Kamehameha as an unlockable celebration in Madden, which I don't think gets enough notoriety for how insane that is. And I'm also not sure how legally permissible it is for the inclusion of that, but you know, whatever. The last one in 2018, I really don't want to give credit to him, but Myles Garrett did have a very sick Netero celebration, which I do have to give style points to for originality. In 2021, we start to see some new faces enter the picture, including Joey Bosa, who I had no idea even liked anime. Travis Homer had this very cool Attack on Titan salute after ripping this huge touchdown. And that year, we also see the first entry for a juggernaut on our list in the NFL, Adam Butler. Adam Butler is currently a 30-year-old defensive tackle who plays for the Las Vegas Raiders. And what he lacks in variety, he makes up for in consistency. With 6 recorded anime celebrations, Butler is the most prolific anime fan in the NFL, including the latest one of any player on our list, this sack celebration on January 5th, 2025. Finishing out our analysis of America's game, we have this Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery Kamehameha on Amon-Ra St. Brown from the 2024 season, as well as 2 fusion dances from the Texas defense that same year. Now, I would be remiss if I didn't mention Jamal Williams, and he's probably the first players that most people think of whenever they think of anime fandom in the NFL. I mean, who can forget his iconic Sunday Night Football introduction?
First swag Kazakage, leader of the hidden village of the Den.
Like a lot of athletes on this list, he's had plenty of discussions about his love of anime in off-the-field interviews, but he actually does not land on our list because based on my research, he has never attempted an anime celebration on the field, which shocked me because he's one of the first athletes I thought of when coming up with the idea for this list, but he's never even so much as done a Kamehameha after running in a touchdown. My last note on the NFL is that anime culture has without a doubt permeated the NFL bubble off the field. While we'll get more into that in a bit, it's safe to say it's now a staple on the gridiron as well. Now, you'd think that combat sports would be saturated with anime references given the violence that they both share, and while there is some representation, there's not nearly as much as you'd think. A big part of this is probably due to the fact that combat sports are one-on-one, and in team sports, there's multiple people on a team, meaning there's more of a chance for a weeb to crop up, but there's still a few honorable mentions in MMA and boxing. And the first person I want to mention, if you're a fan of UFC, you probably had in mind before you even clicked on this video. Israel Adesanya is a 35-year-old MMA fighter from New Zealand, and he's the definitive weeb athlete. His nickname, The Last Stylebender, is an obvious reference to the quasi-anime Avatar. He learned manga-accurate hand signs for the Reaper Death Seal and the Lightning Blade. He even whipped out the goddamn Death Note in the ring. This dude is unapologetically an anime fan. I think my favorite moments from him come from his fight with Anderson Silva. There was this through line of Rock Lee vs. Gara throughout the lead up to the fight, something Adesanya even brought to the weigh-in. People made edits of this moment, and Adesanya even hit the Rock Lee pose mid-match, which is insane. After Israel, we have Fernando Padilla and Walter Zelaya with a One Piece and Dragon Ball celebration respectively. And last, the only non-UFC celebration I could find was this very cool Gear 5 celly from boxer Tenshin Nasukawa. Now, there was a ton of anime representation during the 2020 and 2024 Olympic Games, which were held in Japan and Paris respectively. Italian distance runner Massimo Tano hit this Gear 3 celebration after winning the gold medal in the 20-kilometer walk. And speaking of One Piece, Greek athlete Miltiades Tentaglu hit this really epic Gear 2 entrance. Also, extra points to American shot putter Peyton Otterdahl for this sick Frankie entrance. And the last celebration for the 2020 Olympics, I'm really not sure if it's even a celebration, but we're going to count it anyway. The Japanese national volleyball team hit this fake spike into a set, which this YouTube compilation claims is a reference to Haikyuu. Now, if this is legit, this has got to be the most legendary anime reference in sports history, because not only are they referencing an anime about the sport that they're playing, but this is during an Olympic match, and they're literally using the technique from the manga for its intended purpose. Also, with how Haikyuu popularized the sport in Japan, I have no doubt that everyone on this team is at least familiar with the series, and some of them were potentially inspired to pursue volleyball because of it. However, this also might just be a regular volleyball strategy. The matches in Haikyuu contain real-life volleyball tactics, and I highly doubt a fake spike into a set was just never conceptualized prior to the Haikyuu manga. But whatever, it's cool, so let's count it. The 2024 Summer Olympics saw a growth in anime celebrations proportional to the rest of the sports world. British boxer Ben Whittaker hit this Kamehameha celebration after his victory. The French fencing team also hit a Kamehameha after defeating the United States and winning the bronze medal. One Piece superfan Lorenzo Simonelli hit the Gear 5 laughing pose before his race. It's also worth noting that he hit this General Luffy stance after winning the men's 110-meter hurdles at the European Athletics Championship 2 months earlier, as well as sporting the straw hat and various other winner's circle moments throughout his career. There was also some love for Jujutsu Kaisen this year. There was this piercing blood celebration from Taiwanese canoeist Noritashi Kamo, as well as the British relay team who all collectively hit the Gojo hand pose after their bronze medal victory. But before we move on, I want to quickly go back to the man that we kicked off this video with. Noah Lyles undoubtedly gets the weeb crown at the 2024 Olympics, not just for his performance, but his variety of celebrations. On top of his iconic Yu-Gi-Oh celebrations, he hit us with this classic Kamehameha, but also the Gojo hand pose. And while I don't know shit about the sport of sprinting, given Lyles' surging popularity and his dominance during the Olympics, I have no doubt that we haven't seen the last of his anime representation on the world stage. Now, I quickly want to talk about the sports which didn't have anime celebrations, some of which really surprised me. Basketball, based on my research, had 0 in-game anime celebrations. I found plenty of off-the-court interviews with basketball players talking about their love of anime. I know Zion is a huge fan, but nothing that happened during an actual NBA game, which blew my mind. Baseball also didn't have any that I found, which blew my mind a lot less. Given baseball's popularity in Japan, this still surprised me a little bit. While I'm sure it's happened on some baseball diamond someplace in the world over the course of time, there was none that I could find on the internet. But as a side note, anime culture is invading the world of baseball just in an indirect way. I've noticed some stadiums having anime nights at some of their games for baseball and beyond, including One Piece Night at SoFi Stadium, One Piece Night with the Lakers, and One Piece Night at Fenway Park. And you know, it's a shame because I live in Pittsburgh, but I would have loved to go. It's just a shame that there's not an MLB club that's all about piracy, naval warfare, plundering, all the things that One Piece is about, because it would make almost too much sense for them to collab with that team. But anyway, hockey and golf also had no anime celebrations, which didn't surprise me at all. I do think this has a lot to do with the fact that these are both traditionally white-coded sports. As we'll see in a moment, race is a huge component in how these anime celebrations got as popular as they are in the sports world, at least in North America. The only white-coded sport that did have an anime celebration of some kind was NASCAR. In July 2024, Bubba Wallace sported this McDonald's-sponsored Jujutsu Kaisen decal for his car. Wallace is not an anime fan himself, and he didn't know what this decal was, but he recognized that this decal was probably pretty cool to some people out there. While NASCAR is also a white-coated sport, it's worth noting that the only driver I could find who had an anime reference of any kind is Bubba Wallace, who is the only black driver in the NASCAR Cup Series, which I feel like is the result of some kind of cosmic coincidence. Now, before we take a harder look at the data, just for fun, I wanted to talk about my top 10 anime celebrations in sports, including ones that we haven't even discussed yet. This SAC celebration lands on this list purely for originality. A relatively obscure character as far as anime sports celebrations go, this celebration might have been higher, but as a Steelers fan, I can only give Myles Garrett the absolute minimum amount of credit possible for anything. Marcos has several goal celebrations, but this one makes the list because it's literally Krillin in soccer form doing a Destructo Disc. A rare move to emulate, he's probably also the only athlete who actually looks like the character he's referencing, so he's got to get some extra points for that. We talked about this one a good bit. I think it has to land here because if this is real, this is the only moment based on an anime about sports, and as I said earlier, it's literally the technique from the manga being used for its intended purpose. However, seeing that this is just a volleyball strategy that's probably been in the game for years, it can't land much higher because its authenticity is still in question. I didn't mention this athlete, but this is a celebration from 2021 by Leandro Damio. This one is another one that gets points for originality, and yes, he did end up confirming this was a Yu Yu Hakusho reference on Twitter. Well done. I'm bundling all of the Rock Lee symbolism from his Anderson Silva fight into one packet here. The way that the drama of sports and anime mirror each other is kind of the whole point of this video, and the athlete acknowledging this similarity while acting out his role, including during the damn match, is just too perfect to leave off this top 10 list. Solanke is currently the anime Selly juggernaut in sports, but if I had to choose one of his celebrations, it would be this Toby Mask goal celebration. Again, he gets points for referencing a relatively obscure character during a professional soccer match, as well as using a physical prop for a celebration, which I'm surprised isn't illegal in soccer. That put him into the top 5. The saga between Martinez and Almiron and how they honored each other after they parted ways is just too anime to leave off this list. Again, I'm bundling all of their fusion dances because they all tell one story that exemplifies what's so great about sports and manga. Apart from being on the world stage during the Olympics and using a prop, the symbolism of Lyles pulling out Exodia to signal that the race is over and he's already won is just perfection. Now, here's one that I didn't mention, but I had to talk about. This was a real pain in the ass to find because this is actually from a Japanese high school soccer game. But I did track down the game as well as the history of this moment. Well, unfortunately, I believe they ended up losing this match. The coordination and grit required for a group of high school kids to pull off this in a national title game is too impressive to rank any lower. And last, in my opinion, the sickest anime celebration of all time, and I'm also going to let my bias show, is this. I remember watching this live, and it was the first moment anime was referenced in sports where it really just like blew my mind and asking myself, how do we get here to where I'm watching Naruto being referenced casually on NFL Sunday? James Conner, who I don't think even watches anime and was just helping out, acts as a shadow clone and helps Juju craft the Rasengan. Jesse James is the recipient, I guess Kabuto in this case, and the whole thing is just beautifully executed. The only blemish is the Steelers' Twitter account takes a massive L for calling the celebration a Mortal Kombat fatality, but you can't hold that against Juju. Overall, just peak celebration. Now, before we wrap up, since I have this detailed spreadsheet, I did want to pull some stats I thought were interesting, as well as offer some analysis on the anime references in sports phenomenon. Now, I created a few graphs based on the data I collected in order to chart the growth of anime celebrations in sports. The first graph I want to look at is just the pure number of celebrations per year. Obviously, you see a pretty steady growth over time, a little bit of a dip during the COVID years, and a huge spike in 2024. 2025 is still young, and if last year is any indication, we're due for another explosion of weebness. Next graph I want to look at is based on sport. And yeah, there's a pretty clear winner here. To be fair, given soccer's global reach and multitude of professional leagues, it's certainly working with a larger sample size of athletes than something like football, but its dominance can't be denied. Seems a little odd that we only have 5 sports total, one of which is hurdling, which could debatably be filed under Olympics, and no basketball, which still blows my mind. The last chart is a breakdown of athletes, and just for clarity's sake, I limited this to athletes who have had at least 2 celebrations and still ended up being kind of a mess. Just focusing on the heavy hitters, Dominic Solanke is a pretty clear winner, and he doesn't show any signs of stopping, which is encouraging to see. Eduardo Salvio is sneaking in a close second, and Israel Adesanya comes up third as the most popular non-soccer athlete on our list. The last chart I want to look at is a breakdown of representation by series. Dragon Ball is the clear winner here, and the percentage almost exactly mirrors the sport of soccer, which is appropriate given how popular the anime is in Latin America. One Piece easily makes second place, although I'll admit, I thought their share was a bit higher than this. In 2024, One Piece was undoubtedly the hottest anime to reference, but it's still going to take a while for its legacy to catch up with Dragon Ball. One notable omission from the top hitters on this list, no Naruto. And relative to its popularity in the West, it's a glaring exclusion. And it's not for lack of iconic poses either. You got hand signs, jutsus, etc. And there's only a handful of these celebrations that actually ended up making our list. If there are any professional athletes that are watching this video, you need to change that. Here's a few other general notes that I really couldn't incorporate into a chart. First of all, there were absolutely no celebrations based on sports anime at all, unless you count the Haikyuu one, which is dubious at best. Now, sports anime is just not as popular compared to the traditional action shonen, but you think that athletes of all people would gravitate to the sports genre. I guess you could argue that sports manga don't really have the same list of iconic poses as action shonen do, with all kinds of transformations and moves, etc. But I also didn't see sports anime referenced at all in any off-the-field interviews by any athlete, which is a shame because some of my favorite manga of all time are sports manga, so I like to see them get more love. Also, every single series referenced, except for one which was Sailor Moon, was of the shonen demographic, or at least series that are traditionally considered to be shonen. Furthermore, every single series, with the exception of Attack on Titan and again Sailor Moon, was a Shonen Jump title. Now, I understand that Jump is the face of anime, but given the amount of anime that are accessible to athletes and really anybody on like Crunchyroll or Hulu or whatever, it just goes to show Jump's insane cultural dominance. The last point I want to bring up is the importance of race as well as Black anime culture in the growth of anime sports celebrations. Now, Black anime culture is a topic that I'm not qualified to dive into for obvious reasons, but it's not a coincidence that almost every single non-soccer athlete on this list was a person of color. In fact, there were only 2 white guys on the entire list outside of soccer, Peyton Ottertall at the Olympics and Joey Bosa. I didn't want to make a pie chart out of this because it felt really weird, but you get the idea. Even when you do throw soccer in there, there's still very few white guys doing these celebrations, which is interesting. As I mentioned earlier, the sports that are generally considered to be white-coded, there were no anime celebrations at all. And again, not my place to speculate on the why in this case, but there's definitely a correlation between Black anime culture and the rise of references to anime in professional sports. In terms of other factors that cause this anime and sports phenomenon, the advent of social media fundamentally changed what it meant to be an athlete and allowed for this kind of thing to happen. Athletes with any level of success are now 24/7 brand managers running their social media, starting clothing lines, and putting their personality out there to build their brands. And while I'm sure there may have been some obscure anime references in sports prior to the internet, it's unlikely just because that's not what sports were about back then. Flamboyant stars with larger-than-life personalities were seen as the exception, not the rule. And unless you were playing an individual sport, you weren't really supposed to stand out from the unit. But now that's totally changed. Athletes can now enjoy a level of notoriety disproportionate to their on-the-field success if they stand out enough and put themselves out there. If they play their cards right, this can catapult them into massive success after they hang up their cleats. It's this shift in how sports are viewed that allows these once closet weebs to be themselves and gain a cult following. Seeing how these athletes display their personality nowadays would have blown my mind if I saw them as a kid. I would have never thought in a million years I would see references to the nerdy shows that I enjoyed during the cool masculine sports my dad would watch on TV. And it's not until we entered this new era of player expression that something like this even became possible. In closing, I think the larger reason why sports and anime are so compatible is how similar they are on a meta level. In anime, you might be watching two dudes beating the crap out of each other, and someone walking into a room, not knowing the context of what's happening, might see just that. But the entertainment doesn't come from two soulless action figures banging together, but the culmination of these characters' relationship, how this affects the larger world around them, what the creators are trying to say, how that applies to our real world, etc. And sports are exactly the same. Even when sports are played at the highest level, just seeing a bunch of random people hitting each other until a ball crosses a goal line is a pretty boring thing. Once you learn about who's playing in this game, what their history is, what the team is playing for, why teams are behaving the way that they do, what that strategy says about them, etc., sports become infinitely more interesting. I think this is what you're starting to see with the WNBA. The league's popularity ballooned once the saga of Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese became publicly known, because finally the public had something to sink their teeth into. Anime is the same way. The flashing lights and violence might attract you, but it's when you sit down and deep dive into these worlds that you really fall in love. And even when athletes aren't trying to, the drama of sports can't help but mimic the drama of anime. In both mediums, what's interesting isn't what you're seeing on screen. It's what you feel and how art imitates life. Thank you for watching this deep dive. Tracking all these celebrations down was a lot of work, but ended up being a lot more fun than I thought it would be. But speaking of that, if you made it this far, I still need some help finalizing my research. There were 3 anime celebrations that I couldn't include in my list because I could not track down any information about them, and I know someone out there has to recognize these. The first one is this low quality picture of a soccer player who appears to be doing a Kamehameha during warm-ups. His hair seems very recognizable, and I promise I googled every possible combination of blue-haired soccer player in blue uniform, and nothing came up that matched this. I couldn't even find the team name or match the uniform, so if someone out there knows who this is or what this team is, please leave a comment. The final 2 that I couldn't find were part of the same YouTube hype compilation titled Anime Celebrations in Football, so they can't be that rare. But I searched for at least an hour on both of these and I couldn't find anything. The first is a Nico Robin celebration by number 32 and what appears to be Jubilo Owada FC. I did check the team's roster for that number over the past several years, but I didn't see someone who looked like the guy in this picture. I also reversed image searched this athlete and couldn't find anything, so with all this information, I feel like we gotta be able to find this guy. And the last one is this Gojo hand pose from this soccer player. Nice eye cover, by the way. It seems like a pretty modern clip, so I didn't think it'd be that hard to find this guy, but I couldn't find anything. It doesn't help that there's basically nothing helpful in frame, and we can't even see his eyes. But yeah, someone out there has to know what game this is from. So I'd appreciate some comments if any soccer fans out there know who these players are. Additionally, I'm going to try to leave a link to my actual Google Sheet that I used for my research in the description. So if anyone wants to make corrections to what I have in there, add in ones I may have missed, or update it with new ones that come out throughout the years, I'd really appreciate it. I really think this would be a lot of fun for all these sports nerds out there that are really into stats and facts. So if you're interested, please check out the Google Sheet link in the description. Anyway, thank you for watching.